"You need to move out," my mom announced, her voice flat, as she chewed a mouthful of Christmas turkey. The words hit me like a physical blow, a cold slap in the face amidst the warmth of the festive season. I remember the clinking of cutlery, the soft hum of Christmas carols playing from the living room, and the sudden, deafening silence that followed her statement. My dad, who had been carving another slice of ham, froze, his knife poised midair. My younger sister, Sarah Y., died, choked on her mashed potatoes. "Really?" I managed to stammer, the single word barely a whisper, yet it felt like a shout in the stillness. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. Was I wrong to expect more from my own family, especially on Christmas Day? Tell me, would you have reacted any differently if your entire world was suddenly pulled out from under you with a side of cranberry sauce? It all started, I suppose, not on that fateful Christmas Day, but much, much earlier. My name is Alex, and for as long as I could remember, I had been the responsible one. The oldest sibling, the one who always had a plan, the one who tried to keep the peace. My parents, though loving, well, they were a lot. My dad was a dreamer, constantly hopping from one get-rich quick scheme to another, each one more elaborate and doomed than the last. My mom was the more grounded of the two, but her idea of grounded often meant being intensely practical, sometimes to the point of being utterly ruthless. Sarah, my sister, was 5 years younger than me, and though we were close, she often bore the brunt of our parents' more chaotic tendencies, resulting in a rebellious streak a mile wide. My childhood wasn't exactly idyllic. We moved a lot, chasing my dad's latest business venture, which meant constantly changing schools and making new friends, only to leave them behind. It taught me resilience, I suppose, but also a deep-seated desire for stability, something I craved more than anything. When I finally graduated high school, I was determined to break the cycle. I worked 2 part-time jobs while taking online college courses, saving every penny I could. My dream was simple: get a stable job, buy a small house, and create a life where I didn't have to worry about the next shoe dropping. My parents, of course, were proud of my ambition, but their pride felt more like a passive acknowledgement than genuine support. They saw my drive as something inherent to me, not something they needed to foster or contribute to. The biggest hurdle was college. I knew they couldn't afford to send me, and I refused to take out crippling loans that would tether me to debt for decades. So I meticulously planned. I applied for every scholarship under the sun, worked extra shifts, and eventually secured enough grants and scholarships to cover tuition for a state university, with the understanding that I would live at home to save on rent and living expenses. My mom, in her characteristic practical way, agreed. "It makes sense, Alex," she'd said. "You help out around the house and we save money. It's a win-win." And that's exactly what I did. For the past 3 years, I had juggled full-time classes, a demanding part-time job at a local coffee shop, and all the household chores my mom deemed my share. I cooked dinners, cleaned the bathrooms, did the laundry, and even took care of Sarah when my parents were out. I was essentially a live-in housekeeper and nanny, all while pursuing my degree. I didn't mind, not really. It was part of the deal, part of my path to independence. I was on track to graduate with honors, a degree in business administration clutched tightly in my hand, ready to embark on the stable life I had always yearned for. Then came the new development, Sarah. She had just finished high school, and unlike me, she had absolutely no desire to go to college. Her dream was to be a fashion designer, and she had been accepted into a prestigious but incredibly expensive art school in a major city, several states away. My parents, surprisingly, were ecstatic. "It's Sarah's dream, Alex." My mom had gushed, her eyes sparkling with an excitement I had rarely seen directed at my own accomplishments. "We have to support her," and support her they did. Suddenly, There were discussions about how to pay for her tuition, her dorm, her living expenses. My dad, miraculously, seemed to have found a stable, his words, not mine job working for a distant cousin's construction company, which meant a steady paycheck for now. My mom, ever the pragmatist, started tightening the family budget, cutting down on unnecessary expenses. I thought nothing of it at the time, chalking it up to parental love and the usual financial gymnastics that characterized our family life. I even offered to help out more, picking up extra shifts at the coffee shop, thinking it would ease their burden. Christmas rolled around, and despite the underlying financial tension, the mood was festive. We had a beautiful tree, plenty of presents, and my mom had cooked her legendary turkey dinner. The house smelled of pine and spices, and for a fleeting moment I felt a sense of peace, a rare glimpse of the stable, happy family life I always longed for. We were halfway through dinner, everyone laughing and sharing stories, when my mom dropped the bomb. "You need to move out," she repeated, this time with a definitive nod, as if confirming a long, decided decree. My dad, finally regaining his composure, cleared his throat. "Well, Alex, you're graduating in May, right? You'll be getting a real job soon. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet." Sarah, meanwhile, had recovered from her choke and was now looking at me with an odd mixture of pity and guilt. "We need your room, Alex," my mom continued, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Sarah needs a dedicated space for her design work when she comes home for breaks. Her art school requires a studio space, even for remote projects, and it would be too expensive to rent one near campus, plus her dorm is tiny." My mind reeled. They were kicking me out, not because I was a burden, not because I hadn't pulled my weight, but to accommodate Sarah's art studio for when she came home on breaks . This wasn't about me standing on my own 2 feet. It was about making space for someone else, someone they considered more deserving of their limited resources. The injustice of it all burned in my chest. 3 years of sacrifices, of working tirelessly, of being the dutiful child, all for this. My scholarships and grants meant I didn't owe them anything financially for my education, but I had paid them back tenfold in labor and emotional support. But I'm still in school," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have finals, I have my job. Where am I supposed to go?" My mom waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, you'll figure it out. You're resourceful, Alex. You always are." My dad chimed in, "Look, we'll help you find a place. A small apartment, maybe. It's an exciting new chapter for you." Their words, meant to be encouraging, felt like a betrayal. They were offering me platitudes while dismantling my life, all for the sake of Sarah's art school ambitions. I looked at Sarah, hoping for some sign of dissent, some flicker of solidarity, but she just looked down at her plate, picking at a piece of turkey. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and bitter disappointment. The festive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a suffocating tension. I felt utterly alone, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to be my anchor. I tried to reason with them, to appeal to their sense of fairness. "Mom, Dad, I've been doing everything you've asked. I've been contributing financially, helping around the house, taking care of Sarah. I'm graduating in May. Can't I just stay until then? Give me a few months to save up properly, to find a place after I have my degree and a full-time job secured." My mom, however, was unyielding. "Alex, we've already made the decision. Sarah needs her space. She has a big future ahead of her, and we need to prioritize that." It was clear then. I was not a priority. My future, my stability, my sacrifices, none of it mattered in the face of Sarah's artistic aspirations. I felt a cold anger settle in my gut, a feeling I had rarely experienced towards my family. They were using me, plain and simple, and now that I was no longer convenient, they were discarding me. The next few weeks were a blur of frantic activity. I spent every spare moment after classes and work searching for apartments, trying to navigate the confusing world of leases and deposits with almost no savings. I reached out to friends, but everyone was either still living at home or in cramped student housing. The reality of my situation was stark. I was being pushed out with nowhere to go, all while still being expected to perform at peak academic and professional levels. The pressure was immense, and I felt a growing resentment towards my parents, and, unfairly, towards Sarah. She seemed oblivious, wrapped up in her art school preparations, excitedly talking about her dorm room and her classes. I couldn't bring myself to tell her how much her dream was costing me. I did, however, find a glimmer of hope. One of my co-workers at the coffee shop, an older woman named Brenda, had a spare room in her small apartment. She was a kind, eccentric artist who understood the struggles of young people trying to make their way in the world. She offered me the room at a reduced rent, far cheaper than anything else I had found, on the condition that I help her with her art commissions occasionally. It was a lifeline, a temporary reprieve, but it still meant I had to scramble to move all my belongings and adjust to a new living situation in the middle of my busiest semester. The stress was immense. I was studying for finals, working almost full-time, and packing my life into boxes, all while trying to process the emotional abandonment I felt. Moving day was a particularly bleak affair. My parents, true to form, were too busy to help. My dad had a work emergency, and my mom was helping Sarah pick out fabrics for her new projects. Sarah was, predictably, nowhere to be seen. Brenda and a couple of my friends from work were the only ones who showed up to help me lug my meager belongings into her small apartment. As I packed the last box from my childhood bedroom, the room that was now destined to be Sarah's studio, I felt a profound sense of loss, not just of a physical space, but of the illusion of a supportive family. I left a note on my bed for my parents, simple and to the point. Thanks for the Christmas present. I didn't wait for a response. Life with Brenda was an adjustment, but a welcome one. She was quirky but supportive, and her apartment, though small, felt like a sanctuary. I finished my degree with renewed determination, fueled by a quiet rage that pushed me to excel. I graduated with honors, just as planned, and immediately landed a fantastic entry-level position at a marketing firm, a direct result of my hard work and the glowing recommendations from my professors and Brenda. I was finally on my way. I worked tirelessly, saved diligently, and within a year I had my own small apartment, a place that was truly mine, earned through my own blood, sweat, and tears. My relationship with my family remained strained. My parents would call occasionally, asking about my job, my life, but their inquiries felt superficial, lacking genuine interest. They never apologized for kicking me out, never acknowledged the pain they had caused. Sarah, after a semester at her art school, decided it wasn't for her. She dropped out, came home, and ended up using my old room as, well, mostly a place to store her clothes and occasionally practice her sketching. The grand art studio my parents had sacrificed my stability for became an overpriced closet. This fact, while infuriating, also brought a strange sense of vindication. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. My parents were always quick to remind me that family comes first, but their actions had shown me a different truth. Now, a few years later, my dad's stable job with his cousin had, predictably, fallen through. My mom, ever the pragmatist, had invested a significant portion of their savings into Sarah's art school and her subsequent attempts to find herself, which included a brief stint as a barista and an even briefer attempt at becoming an influencer. They were in financial trouble, deep trouble, and they needed help. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have forgiven them? Would you have helped the family that had so readily discarded you? I received a call from my mom, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Alex, honey, your dad. He lost his job again, and with Sarah's student loan payments starting soon and the mortgage, we're really struggling. We were hoping you could help us out just for a little while until we get back on our feet." The irony was not lost on me. The very people who had cast me out when I was most vulnerable were now asking for my assistance, expecting me to be their savior. I listened silently, my mind racing. I had a good job, a comfortable life, and most importantly, stability. I had achieved everything I had set out to do independently, against their indifference. My first instinct was to say no, to finally assert myself and tell them to reap what they had sown, to remind them of that Christmas day, of their callous disregard for my well-being. But then I thought of Sarah. Despite everything, she was still my sister. She was caught in the crossfire of our parents' poor decisions and her own youthful naivety. And despite my anger, a part of me, the old responsible one, still felt a pang of concern for my family. So I took a deep breath and I laid out my conditions. "I will help you," I said, my voice firm, "but it won't be without terms." My mom, clearly desperate, quickly agreed. "Anything, Alex, anything you need. First," I began, "I will not be moving back home, and Sarah will need to find her own accommodation." There was a gasp on the other end, likely from my mom realizing the implications for Sarah's studio. "Second, I will provide a loan, not a gift. It will be a formal agreement with a repayment plan and interest. You will pay me back every penny on schedule. And third, and most importantly, you will both attend family counseling with me. We need to address what happened and why you made the choices you did before I can truly help you rebuild." The silence on the line was deafening for a long moment. I could almost hear my mom processing the audaciousness of my demands, the audacity of me, the discarded child, dictating terms. Finally she exhaled a long, weary sigh. "Okay, Alex, okay, we'll do it, all of it." And so the journey began. I formalized the loan, drawing up a contract with the help of a lawyer friend, ensuring every detail was ironclad. My parents, humbled by their circumstances, signed it without argument. The family counseling sessions were excruciating at first, filled with awkward silences, defensive excuses from my parents, and raw, unfiltered pain from me. I finally got to articulate the hurt, the betrayal, the feeling of being disposable. It was cathartic, albeit painful. Sarah, surprisingly, was also quite vocal, admitting that she had felt guilty for years, seeing how her dream had impacted me. She apologized sincerely, something my parents still struggled with. It took months, but slowly, painstakingly, we started to chip away at years of unspoken resentments and dysfunctional patterns. My parents, forced to confront their choices and their impact on me, slowly began to change. They started taking responsibility, not just for their financial woes, but for their emotional ones. My dad, no longer chasing pipe dreams, found steady work as a handyman, using his practical skills to earn an honest living. My mom started working part-time at a local bakery, finding a quiet satisfaction in her work. Sarah, inspired by my example and finally understanding the value of hard work, enrolled in a community college, pursuing a more practical degree in graphic design, while still nurturing her artistic passion on the side. The loan I provided helped them restructure their finances, pay off some critical debts, and stabilize their situation. They were diligent with their repayments, a testament to their newfound commitment. Our relationship is still a work in progress, but it's stronger, more honest, and built on a foundation of mutual respect, rather than silent resentment. I visit them regularly now, and the tension that once permeated our interactions has largely dissipated. We can talk, truly talk, about our lives, our struggles, and our hopes. And Sarah, my sister, is not just a sister, but a friend, someone who genuinely understands the complexities of our family history. We arrived at my parents' house around 2 in the afternoon, and at first, everything seemed perfectly fine and normal. The house was decorated beautifully with lights and garland, and a huge Christmas tree in the living room covered in ornaments. There was Christmas music playing from the speakers. The whole place smelled like cinnamon and pine, and it felt warm and festive. All the adults were mingling in the kitchen and living room, drinking wine and eggnog and catching up, while the kids ran around playing together. My mom seemed warm and welcoming when we first arrived, giving Oliver a big hug and complimenting his light-up reindeer sweater, telling him how handsome he looked. She even made a point to ask him if he was excited for Santa to come in 2 days, and he lit up talking to her about what he'd asked for. I remember standing there watching them interact and thinking to myself, okay, this is good, this is progress, maybe things really are going to be different this time. The party went on for several hours, and everything continued to seem fine on the surface. The kids played games together, running around the house and the backyard, laughing and having a great time. We did a cousin's gift exchange where all the kids drew names and exchanged small presents with each other, and Oliver was thrilled because he got a Lego set that he'd been wanting. He immediately wanted to open it and start building, and a couple of his cousins sat with him and helped, and it was just such a sweet moment. The adults chatted and caught up on what had been happening in our lives, and I actually found myself relaxing and enjoying the party, letting my guard down because everything seemed to be going well. My mom was being attentive to all the kids, including Oliver. She was smiling and laughing, and I thought my concerns had been unfounded, that maybe she really had taken our conversation to heart. Dinner was served around 5 o'clock in the evening, a huge traditional Christmas spread that my mom had clearly spent days preparing. There was a massive ham with brown sugar glaze, creamy mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade rolls, cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole with marshmallows on top, and probably half a dozen other side dishes covering every inch of the dining table. Everyone gathered around the big dining room table that my parents have, the one that extends to seat like 14 people, and we all sat down together for this big family meal. Oliver sat between Jake and me, and he was absolutely chattering away nonstop about the Lego set he'd gotten in the gift exchange, showing us the instruction booklet and talking about what he was going to build first, just radiating pure childhood happiness and excitement. I kept catching my mom's eye across the table, and she'd smile at me, and I felt this sense of relief and gratitude that finally things seemed to be working out. After dinner, everyone was full and content, and the kids were getting a little restless and hyper from all the excitement. That's when my mom stood up and announced that she'd made a huge dessert spread, and that all the kids should come into the kitchen for treats. I heard the kids all cheer and watched them scramble out of their chairs, racing each other to the kitchen to see what she'd made. I followed behind them at a more leisurely pace, smiling at their enthusiasm, and when I got to the kitchen doorway, I saw the most incredible spread of Christmas desserts I'd ever seen. There were plates of sugar cookies decorated like snowmen and Christmas trees, chocolate chip cookies, frosted brownies, red velvet cupcakes with cream cheese frosting, apple pie, pumpkin pie, homemade fudge cut into perfect little squares, peppermint bark, and probably more that I'm forgetting. It was like something out of a magazine, this beautiful display of holiday treats, and all the kids were oohing and aahing over everything. This is where everything fell apart and my world just completely shattered. I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, leaning against the frame and watching with a smile on my face when I noticed that my mom was plating up individual dessert assortments for each child. She was making these really nice little plates with a variety of treats, a couple cookies, a brownie, a piece of fudge, making sure each plate had a good selection. I watched her hand plates to my brother David's 4 kids one by one, and they each took their plates and ran off to the living room, thrilled with their sugar haul. Then she made plates for my sister Emma's 3 kids and handed those out. and they also scattered to different parts of the house to enjoy their treats. Oliver was standing there patiently waiting for his turn, not pushing or demanding or being impatient, just standing quietly and watching, and I could see him looking up at my mom with these big, hopeful eyes, probably expecting an extra special plate since she'd been asking about his favorite treats, and he knew she knew what he liked best. But then my mom just turned away from him completely, like he wasn't even standing there, and she started putting the dessert trays away and covering them with aluminum foil. Oliver looked confused, his smile fading, and he said in his small voice, "Grandma, what about me? Can I have some dessert too?" And I swear on everything I hold dear, I will never forget what happened next as long as I live, because the image is burned into my brain and replays in my nightmares. My mom looked down at him, and with the coldest, most dismissive expression I have ever seen on her face, an expression I didn't even know she was capable of making, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Sweetie, I didn't make enough for everyone. These desserts are only for family, and I must have miscounted. Only for family." Those were her exact words to my 6-year-old son, her own flesh and blood grandson, her own daughter's child. She told him he wasn't family. Oliver's face just completely crumpled in a way that no parent ever wants to see their child's face crumple. His eyes went wide with shock and hurt. His mouth fell open, and I could see him trying to process what she'd just said, trying to make sense of how his own grandmother could say something so cruel. He asked, in this trembling voice that was clearly fighting back tears, "But Grandma, I'm family too, aren't I? I'm your grandson." And my mom, this woman who raised me, who I thought I knew, just shrugged her shoulders like this was no big deal and said, "Well, I must have forgotten to count you when I was planning how much to make. Maybe next time you'll get some. Why don't you go play now?" Then she actually turned her back on him and walked away, heading back toward the living room like she hadn't just shattered this child's entire world into a million pieces, like she hadn't just told him he wasn't part of the family, like what she'd done was perfectly acceptable. I stood there completely frozen for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds, unable to process what I'd just witnessed, unable to believe that my own mother had actually said those words to my child. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to find some other explanation, some way that I'd misunderstood what just happened, but there was no misunderstanding. It was crystal clear what she'd done. Oliver turned around, and his eyes found mine across the kitchen, and tears were already streaming down his face. He wasn't making a sound yet, just silently crying with this expression of complete devastation and confusion, and that somehow made it so much worse than if he'd been screaming or throwing tantrum. It was like he was too hurt to even make noise, too shocked to do anything but cry. Jake had been in the bathroom during this whole interaction, and had missed it entirely, and I was actually glad about that in the moment, because if he'd seen and heard what I just saw and heard, I genuinely don't know what he would have done. He might have said or done something we'd all regret, because I know how protective he is of Oliver, and I know how much he already dislikes my mother for how she's treated our son over the years. I immediately went to Oliver and scooped him up in my arms, and the second I touched him, he just broke down completely, sobbing into my shoulder and clinging to me. I could feel his little body shaking with the force of his crying, and my heart was breaking into pieces right along with his. I carried him quickly out of the kitchen, not even looking at anyone else, and took him into the hallway bathroom and locked the door behind us. I just held him while he cried and cried, and when he could finally catch his breath enough to talk, he asked me questions that no child should ever have to ask. He asked me why Grandma didn't love him, why he wasn't part of the family, what he'd done wrong to make her not want him to have dessert, whether it was because he was bad or because she didn't like him. I had absolutely no answers that would make any of this better. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that their own grandmother is intentionally cruel to them for reasons that don't make any logical sense? How do you help them understand that sometimes people who are supposed to love us fail us in terrible ways? I did my best to comfort him, telling him over and over that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he was a wonderful boy and this wasn't his fault, that Grandma was the one who made a mistake, and that he was absolutely part of our family and so loved. I wiped his tears and held him until his breathing started to return to normal, though he was still hiccuping from crying so hard. When he was calm enough, I told him to wait in the bathroom for just a minute, that I needed to go talk to Grandma, but I'd be right back, and I promised him we were going to leave soon and go home, where people appreciated him and loved him the way he deserved. I walked back out of that bathroom seeing absolute red, angrier than I think I've ever been in my entire life. My hands were shaking, and my heart was pounding, and I could feel this rage just coursing through my entire body. My mom was back in the living room now, laughing and chatting with my siblings and watching the other kids eat their desserts like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just emotionally abused a child 5 minutes ago. I walked right up to her, interrupting whatever conversation she was having, and I asked her in a voice that was barely controlled to please speak with me privately in the kitchen. She looked annoyed at being interrupted, but got up and followed me. Once we were in the kitchen, I confronted her directly. I asked her how she could possibly say something like that to Oliver, how she could tell her own grandson that he wasn't family, why she was deliberately excluding him from dessert when there was clearly more than enough food for everyone. I pointed to the trays of desserts that were sitting right there on the counter, still covered but obviously full of treats, and I demanded to know what her excuse was this time. She had the absolute nerve, the audacity, to play dumb and act confused. She put on this innocent expression and said, "Oh my gosh, did I forget to give Oliver a plate? I'm so sorry, honey, it was just an accident. There were so many kids running around, and I must have lost count. You know how chaotic these gatherings get." But I knew she was lying. I'd heard exactly what she said to Oliver, the specific words she used. She didn't forget him or lose count. She deliberately told him the desserts were only for family, and that she hadn't counted him when planning. When I called her out on this, when I told her I'd heard every word she said to my son, she backpedaled and claimed I must have misheard or misunderstood. Then I pointed to the full tray of cookies sitting right there, untouched and perfectly accessible, and I said she could make Oliver a plate right now, if this was really just an oversight. She looked at those cookies and then looked back at me and said, "Oh, those are special cookies I made for your father to take to his work colleagues tomorrow. I can't give those away. They'll..." Spoken for. More excuses, more lies, more proof that this was deliberate. I completely lost it at that point. I told her I knew she was lying, that I'd heard exactly what she said to Oliver, and there was no misunderstanding, that she'd been treating my son like garbage for years, and I was absolutely done making excuses for her behavior and trying to smooth things over. I told her she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that telling a child he's not family is psychological abuse, and that I would not stand by and let her damage my son's self-worth and sense of belonging. She got defensive immediately, her face flushing red, and she raised her voice saying I was being overdramatic and making a mountain out of a molehill. She said Oliver was fine, that kids are resilient and he'd forget about this by tomorrow, and that I needed to stop coddling him so much and making him soft. That's when I noticed that my siblings had come into the kitchen because we were raising our voices, and they could hear us arguing from the living room. My brother David was standing there with his arms crossed, and he actually had the audacity to take my mom's side immediately without even asking what had happened. He said I was making a scene over nothing, that it was just dessert and Oliver could have sweets at home, and that I was being unreasonable and ruining the party for everyone with my dramatics. My sister Emma just stood there silent and uncomfortable, not defending me or Oliver, not speaking up about what was right, just watching like this was some kind of entertaining drama she was observing rather than a serious situation involving her nephew being emotionally abused. My dad came in too, asking what all the commotion was about, and when my mom gave him her version of events, painting herself as the victim of my overreaction, he sided with her too and told me I needed to calm down. I looked around at all of them standing there in that kitchen, my entire family, and I realized with this sinking feeling in my stomach that not a single one of them was going to stand up for my son. They were all perfectly fine with him being treated as less than their own children, with him being excluded and hurt, as long as it didn't disrupt their comfortable family dynamic or force them to confront my mother's behavior. They were all complicit in this pattern of favoritism and exclusion, either actively participating in it like my mom, or passively allowing it to continue like my siblings and my dad. And in that moment, I understood that I couldn't count on any of them to protect Oliver or to do the right thing, that if he was going to be defended and valued, it would have to be by me and Jake, because his own extended family had failed him completely. So before I tell you what I did next, before I reveal how I responded to this impossible situation, I want you to pause right here and think about what you would have done. I want you to comment below and tell me honestly what your response would have been if you were standing in that kitchen. If your child was crying in the bathroom because their grandmother had told them they weren't family, if your entire family was dismissing your very legitimate concerns and telling you that you were overreacting to clear emotional abuse, would you have just gathered your things and left quietly to avoid making more of a scene? Would you have confronted the whole family right there and demanded they acknowledge what had happened? Would you have cut contact immediately? Would you have done exactly what I did? Because I really need to know if my response was justified or if I went too far, and I value your perspective on this. Here's what I did, and I'll admit I didn't think it through carefully or consider all the consequences. I was acting on pure protective instinct and righteous anger. I walked out of that kitchen, went straight back to the bathroom where Oliver was still waiting, and I told him we were leaving right now and that we were going to go home and have our own special dessert party with just him, me, and Daddy, where everyone would be kind and everyone would be included. His face lit up a little bit at that prospect, the first hint of a smile I'd seen since the incident, and we gathered our coats and our things. But before we walked out that door, I knew I had to make a statement, had to make it clear to everyone exactly what had happened and why we were leaving, because I was done protecting my mother's image and keeping quiet about her treatment of my son. I walked back into the living room where all the other kids were still finishing their desserts, and all the adults were gathered, and I made an announcement in a voice that was loud and clear enough for absolutely everyone to hear. I said, Oliver, since Grandma told you that you're not family and that you're not allowed to have dessert here, we're going to go home right now and have an even better dessert party. Just the 3 of us, because you are loved and you are valued and you are important, and you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness by people who claim to care about you. The room went completely silent. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. My mom's face went absolutely white and then flushed red. My siblings looked shocked, their mouths literally hanging open. All the other kids stopped eating and looked confused, asking their parents what was happening and why Oliver was leaving. My dad looked angry, like I'd committed some unforgivable breach of family protocol by calling out what had happened publicly instead of handling it privately. But I didn't care about their reactions or their comfort anymore. I took Oliver's hand, Jake grabbed our coats and the gifts we'd brought, and we walked out of that house with our heads held high. Oliver squeezed my hand tight as we walked to the car, and once we were all buckled in and pulling out of the driveway, he asked me if what I'd said was true, if we were really going to have our own dessert party. I promised him absolutely yes, that we were going to make this the best night ever and show him exactly how special he was. On the drive home, Jake asked what had happened because he'd been out of the room for most of it and had only caught the tail end. When I told him everything, when I recounted word for word what my mother had said to our son and how the rest of the family had reacted, he was absolutely furious. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and he was clenching his jaw so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. He said we should never go back to my parents' house, that my mother didn't deserve to have any kind of relationship with Oliver if this was how she was going to treat him, and that he was done pretending to be civil with people who hurt our child. I agreed with him completely, and we made the decision right there in the car that we wouldn't be attending any more family events until and unless my mother gave Oliver a genuine apology and demonstrated real change in her behavior. When we got home, we made a quick stop at the grocery store and bought absolutely everything Oliver loved. Ice cream in multiple flavors, his favorite cookies, candy canes, hot chocolate mix with extra marshmallows, whipped cream, chocolate syrup, sprinkles, literally every treat we could think of. We came home and set up an elaborate dessert buffet on our dining room table, putting out all the treats in nice bowls and plates like it was a fancy party. We put on Christmas movies, made a big production of preparing sundaes with every topping imaginable, and we sat together as a family eating dessert and watching Elf and laughing. Oliver was smiling again by the end of the night, genuinely happy, and he told me it was the best dessert party he'd ever had because everyone there loved him and wanted him there. That statement broke my heart all over again because it showed me how aware he'd been all along of the way he was being treated by my family. But it also made me so proud of him for being resilient and for being able to still find joy even after being hurt so badly. The fallout from my announcement at my mom's house was immediate, intense, and relentless. That very night, starting around 9 p.m., my phone started blowing up with texts and calls from virtually every member of my extended family. My mom sent me a long, rambling message saying I'd humiliated her in front of everyone, that I'd made her look like a terrible person and a bad grandmother over what she still insisted was an honest mistake, and that I owed her an apology for embarrassing her like that at her own party. She said Oliver was being too sensitive, that I was raising him to be entitled and dramatic, and that real families work through disagreements privately instead of airing them publicly. She said I'd hurt her deeply and damaged our relationship, completely ignoring the fact that she'd just told her grandson he wasn't family. My brother David called me around 10 p.m. and absolutely yelled at me over the phone. He said I'd ruined Christmas for everyone, that I'd upset our mother during what should have been a joyful family celebration, that I'd always been the dramatic one who couldn't just let things go and had to make everything about me. He said I was teaching Oliver to be a victim and to expect special treatment, and that in the real world not everyone gets a trophy or a plate of cookies. He said I needed to apologize to our mother and stop causing unnecessary drama in the family. I was so angry listening to him that I actually hung up on him mid-sentence, something I'd never done before. My sister Emma sent me a more gentle text, but the message was essentially the same. She said she understood I was upset and that maybe there had been a misunderstanding, but she thought I'd overreacted by making that announcement in front of everyone and that maybe I should apologize to Mom to keep the peace. She said families fight, but we always forgive each other and move on, and that holding grudges would only hurt me and Oliver in the long run. She suggested I think about Oliver's relationship with his extended family and whether I really wanted to damage that over one incident. The implication being that I should just accept the abuse to maintain family harmony, which made me furious. My dad called and took a different approach, trying to be the mediator. He said he understood both sides, that maybe Mom had handled things poorly, but I'd also escalated the situation by making a public scene. He said in his day, people handled family disagreements privately and respectfully, and that I should have just taken Oliver home quietly and addressed the issue with my mom later in a calm conversation. He said I was punishing everyone, including Oliver, by creating this rift in the family, and that I needed to think about what was really best for my son. The manipulation in that statement, trying to make me feel like I was the one hurting Oliver by protecting him, was infuriating. I didn't respond to any of them that night. I was too angry, too emotionally exhausted, and I knew that anything I said in that state would only make things worse. I needed time to process everything, to calm down, and to figure out what I wanted to say and what boundaries I needed to establish going forward. Jake and I stayed up late talking through everything, and he was completely supportive of whatever I decided to do. but he made it clear that his priority was Oliver's well-being and emotional safety. Above all else, even above maintaining relationships with my family. The next day was Christmas Eve, and I woke up to more messages from various family members. Some were angry, some were trying to mediate, some were guilt-tripping me about ruining Christmas. Around lunchtime, my mom called me directly. She asked if we were still planning to come to Christmas dinner at their house the next day, like she genuinely thought I would just show up and pretend nothing had happened. I told her absolutely not, that we wouldn't be attending any family events until she acknowledged what she'd actually done to Oliver, gave him a genuine apology, and demonstrated through consistent actions over time that she was going to treat him equally to his other grandchildren. She started crying on the phone, saying I was punishing her and keeping her grandson away from her over nothing, that I was being cruel and vindictive, and that I was ruining Christmas for the whole family. She said everyone was upset, and that it was all my fault for overreacting. I told her that she ruined Christmas the moment she told my son he wasn't family, and I ended the call. Jake and I made the decision that we'd have Christmas just the three of us, and honestly, it ended up being one of the best Christmases we've ever had as a family. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no watching to make sure Oliver wasn't being excluded or hurt. We made special Christmas breakfast together, opened presents at our own pace, watched movies in our pajamas, and just enjoyed being together. Oliver was happy and relaxed in a way I realized he never was at family gatherings, and that told me everything I needed to know about whether we were making the right decision. But the family drama continued throughout the holiday and into the new year. On Christmas Day itself, I received messages from various relatives saying I was being selfish and childish, that I was depriving Oliver of family traditions and memories, and that I needed to be the bigger person and forgive my mom because she's getting older, and we don't know how many Christmases we have left with her. That last guilt trip really got under my skin because it felt so manipulative, like I was supposed to just accept ongoing abuse because of some hypothetical future where my mom isn't around anymore. Like her mortality somehow excused her cruelty. A few family members did reach out privately to say they understood why I was upset, and that they'd actually noticed the favoritism toward the other grandkids over the years too. But not a single one of them was willing to say anything publicly or actually stand up to my mom about her behavior, which honestly just made me feel more alone and unsupported in this whole situation. It was validating to know I wasn't crazy or imagining things, but it was also frustrating that these people who claimed to see the problem weren't willing to be part of the solution. It's been over a week now since the Christmas party incident, and the dust still hasn't fully settled. My mom has sent several more messages, but none of them contain an actual, genuine apology to Oliver. They're all focused on how hurt she is, how unfair I'm being to her, how I'm tearing the family apart and making everyone choose sides. She's positioned herself as the victim in all of this, and much of my family has bought into that narrative. My siblings are still mostly taking her side, though my sister did admit in a private phone call that she's noticed my mom treats Oliver differently than the other grandkids, but she thinks I should just accept it as one of those things and work around it rather than confronting it directly and causing family conflict. That perspective just shows me how normalized this dysfunction has become in my family. I've been absolutely firm in maintaining my boundary that until my mom apologizes to Oliver directly, sincerely, and in a way that shows she actually understands what she did wrong, and until she demonstrates through consistent actions over an extended period that she's going to treat him equally to his cousins, we will not be attending family gatherings or facilitating a relationship between her and Oliver. Jake is completely supportive of this stance, and Oliver actually seems happier and more secure now that we're not constantly putting him in situations where he's made to feel less than or excluded. The aftermath of all this has forced me to really examine and recognize just how dysfunctional my family dynamics have been for a long time, and how much I've been enabling my mom's behavior by always giving her the benefit of the doubt, by making excuses for her, by trying to smooth things over to keep the peace. I've been in therapy for a few years for unrelated issues, but I brought this whole situation up with my therapist in our session last week. She pointed out that my mom's behavior toward Oliver fits a clear pattern of targeted exclusion, emotional manipulation, and favoritism that borders on emotional abuse, and she said that by continuing to expose Oliver to these situations, I was inadvertently teaching him that it's okay for people who claim to love you to treat you poorly, that love comes with conditions and hierarchies. That observation hit me incredibly hard because the absolute last thing I want is for Oliver to grow up thinking he deserves to be treated as less than, or that he should accept mistreatment from people just because they're family. My therapist has been helping me process the complicated guilt I feel about not protecting Oliver from this treatment sooner, about all the times over the years when I convinced him to give Grandma another chance or told him she didn't mean it when she excluded him or gave him less than his cousins. She's helping me understand that I was operating from a place of hope and denial, wanting to believe the best about my mother and my family, but that I'm making the right choice now by prioritizing Oliver's emotional safety and well-being. She's also helping me strengthen my resolve to maintain these boundaries even when the family pressure is intense, and even when I'm being guilted and manipulated, because she says kids need to see their parents advocate for them and protect them, especially when other adults are failing to do so. Looking back on everything that's happened, I keep asking myself if I should have handled any of it differently. Should I have been more private in my confrontation with my mom instead of making that announcement in front of everyone? Should I have just quietly gathered our things and left without saying anything? Should I have tried one more time to have a calm, private conversation with her before taking such a definitive stand? But then I think about Oliver's devastated face when he was crying in that bathroom, asking me why Grandma didn't love him and what he'd done wrong, and I know in my heart that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. He needed to see that someone would stand up for him, that his feelings and his dignity mattered, that he wasn't crazy for being hurt by what happened. And honestly, I think my mom needed to be called out publicly for her behavior because she's gotten away with this kind of treatment for far too long by banking on everyone's desire to keep peace and not make waves or cause uncomfortable confrontations. The hardest part of all of this, the part that keeps me up at night, is grieving the family dynamic I thought we had and accepting the reality of what it actually is and has always been. I wanted so desperately to believe that my mom loved all her grandchildren equally, that my family would rally around Oliver and protect him if he needed them, that I could trust my parents and siblings to treat my child with basic decency, respect, and inclusion. Having those beliefs completely shattered has been painful in a way I didn't anticipate and wasn't prepared for. It's one thing to know intellectually that your family is flawed, but it's another thing entirely to see them choose cruelty toward a child over accountability and change. I've also had to confront my own role in allowing this pattern to continue for as long as it did. I should have drawn harder boundaries years ago when the favoritism first started becoming obvious and undeniable. I should have limited contact or stopped attending events sooner to protect Oliver from repeated situations where I knew he might be hurt or excluded. I carry real guilt about all the times I prioritized maintaining family relationships and keeping the peace over protecting my son from emotional harm. I think about all those incidents over the years, the birthday parties and holidays and family gatherings where Oliver was given less or excluded or made to feel unimportant, and I wish I could go back and handle each one differently, more decisively. So that's my whole story, the complete messy truth of what happened at my family Christmas party, and why I'm now essentially estranged from most of my relatives. I've been called dramatic, oversensitive, vindictive, selfish, and probably a dozen other unflattering things by people who either didn't personally witness what actually happened or who have their own reasons for defending my mom's behavior and maintaining the status quo, but I absolutely stand by what I did. I would make that announcement again. I would walk out of that house again. I would establish and maintain those same boundaries again, because at the end of the day, my primary job as a parent is to protect my son and advocate for him, not to protect my mother's reputation or maintain comfortable appearances for a family that's proven they won't protect him when it matters. Like this video if you were on my side and you think I did the right thing by standing up for my son and calling out the mistreatment publicly. Subscribe for more stories like this where I share the messy, complicated, difficult reality of family dynamics and what it looks like to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard and even when everyone is telling you you're wrong. And please, I'm asking you to share your thoughts and perspectives on this whole situation in the comments section below. Do you think I overreacted and should have handled this more privately? Do you think my response was completely justified given what my mom said and did? Have you experienced favoritism or exclusion in your own family? And if so, how did you handle it, and what would you do differently if you could? I genuinely want to hear from you because I'm still processing all of this, still working through the complicated emotions, and still trying to figure out the best path forward for my family. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for being here, and for taking the time to engage. Your support and perspective mean more than you know. I'll see you all in the next story.